After the divorce, my wife kicked me out and moved two lovers into my place. I went to use the old card my father left me, and the teller's face went bone white. She didn't say a word to the lobby. She simply locked her drawer and signalled for her manager with a trembling hand, whispering, "Sir, you need to step into the private office immediately." My blood immediately ran cold when I discovered that. I am glad to have you here. Drop a comment and let me know where you are listening from and what time it is for you right now. I would love to know who is part of our community. I sat in the cab of my 15-year-old Ford truck, the steering wheel sticky with decades of Street Louis heat and machine shop grease. The sound of the door slamming behind me was the last punctuation mark on a 28-year sentence. I did not feel the urge to cry, and I did not feel the panic of a man who had just been rendered homeless. Instead, I felt the strange, surgical clarity of an accountant looking at a company that had finally filed for bankruptcy. Inside the house, Brittany was likely opening a bottle of champagne with Trevor and Jackson. Out here, the air smelled of exhaust and old metal. It was the smell of my reality. For nearly 3 decades, I had been the silent investor in Brittany's version of a perfect life. I worked 60-hour weeks at the tool and die shop, my lungs inhaling metal shavings and cooling fluid, while she inhaled expensive French perfume. I wore boots with worn-out soles, so she could wear designer heels. I was the engine that kept the mansion running, and she was the hood ornament. I thought we were a team. I thought my labour was building a foundation for our golden years. Now, I realised it had been a subscription service, and the provider had just terminated my access because I was no longer useful. People would ask why I stayed, why a grown man with a steady trade would let a woman and her lawyer lover treat him like a piece of discarded scrap metal. It is called the sunk cost fallacy, a house without bars. I was not weak. I was trapped in an invisible chain. When you spend 28 years pouring your blood and bone into a single structure, you do not want to admit it was built on sand. I had convinced myself that if I worked one more double shift, if I paid off one more credit card, if I provided one more luxury anniversary gift, the investment would finally yield a return of genuine affection. It was a prison made of my own hope and her calculated coldness. I was not just a husband. I was an accidental enabler of my own execution. I checked my phone. My bank account balance was $837. That was the liquid value of Jacob, at 56. It was an insulting number for a lifetime of work. Then, my hand brushed against the glove compartment. Inside was the yellowed envelope Michael had given me. 15 years ago, my father had been a man of grease and few words. He lived in a 2-bedroom house and drove a truck even older than mine. When all else fails, he had said, as his fingers grew cold. At the time, I thought he was being dramatic. Now, I understood he was being prophetic. I pulled out the ancient piece of plastic. It was a credit card, yellowed with age, looking like a relic from a different century. Beside it was a slip of paper with a 4-digit number, written in pencil, no instructions. No manual for a man who had just lost his world. But the card felt strangely heavy in my palm. As I pulled out of the driveway, I looked in the rearview mirror. Brittany was on the balcony of the mansion I paid for, a wine glass in her hand, leaning against Trevor. I did not look away. I did not feel the burn of humiliation anymore. I looked at the ancient card in my hand. This was not a gamble. It was an audit. And the First National Bank was where I would find out if I was truly bankrupt, or if the machinist's son was finally about to get paid. I walked into First National, looking like a ghost in a machine shop. My clothes were wrinkled, my face was rough with stubble, and I was carrying a single suitcase that contained the ruins of my former life. The lobby was filled with the smell of floor wax and the quiet hum of air conditioning. To the people in line, I was just another middle-aged man who had hit a rough patch. To the bank, I was a question mark. Madison, the young teller at the front, did not even look up from her nails when I approached the counter. She had the bored expression of someone who spent her days moving numbers for people she did not respect. I slid the ancient yellowed card across the polished marble. "I need to check the balance," I said. My voice was not a plea, it was a demand for information. She sighed a long, theatrical sound and picked up the card with 2 fingers, as if it were contaminated. "Sir, this card is a relic. I am not even sure our system can recognize this format." "Try it," I said. The tone must have cut through her apathy, because she actually looked at me. She didn't just swipe it. Instead, she manually entered the encrypted serial number embossed on the back into a restricted access terminal. The system didn't just process the request. It triggered a high-level security override that bypassed the standard teller interface. Suddenly, her computer screen started flickering a cascade of numbers and code, scrolling faster than she could read. Her face went from bored to confused, then to a shade of white that matched the marble counter. She whispered something under her breath and abandoned her station without a word. Seconds later, a man in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit appeared. Robert Chen, the branch manager. He looked at me, then at the card, and then back at me, with an expression that bordered on reverence. "Mr. Morrison?" he asked, his voice low and urgent. "Please, follow me. We have a private wealth suite prepared for you." He did not wait for an answer. He ushered me past the regular customers, through a mahogany door I had never noticed before, and into a room that felt like a cathedral of silent capital. Once the door clicked shut, Mr. Chen sat behind a massive desk and turned his screen toward me. My heart did not race, it slowed down. I looked at the number, $24,935,786. I did not breathe for a long second. The air in the room seemed to crystallize. "This account was established 28 years ago," Chen explained. "It was a dormant growth trust. Your father, Michael, began buying into technology giants when they were still operating out of garages. He was what we call a watchman investor. He did not just accumulate wealth, he curated it." I leaned back, the leather chair sighing under my weight. Michael had spent his life in greasy overalls, fixing machines that should have been in scrap heaps. He had lived small, so he could think big. "Mr. Chen handed me a digital file containing my father's notes. As I read them, the silent regret of the watchman became clear. Michael had not hidden this to be cruel. He had hidden it because he saw Brittany for what she was the day we got married. He knew that if he handed me a fortune, while I was still under her spell, she would have consumed both the money and my soul. His notes were filled with a quiet, lingering pain. He had watched me work myself to death for a woman who despised my trade. He had wanted to intervene 100 times, but he knew the timing had to be perfect. He waited for me to lose everything Brittany provided, so that I could finally be safe enough to own what he had built. He was not punishing me, he was protecting the legacy from a parasite until the host was strong enough to survive on his own. "Your father's final instruction was simple," Chen said, his hands finally steady. "The moment you walked through these doors with that card, you were to be given the keys to the kingdom." I looked out the window at the Street Lewis skyline. The machinist's son was gone. The architect had arrived. And the first thing I was going to design was a very expensive ending for my wife. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling window of my suite at the Grand View, watching the morning traffic crawl through Street Louis like tiny, mindless insects. The silence in the room was expensive. It was the first time in 28 years that I did not have Brittany's voice in my ear, complaining about the colour of the curtains or the lack of ambition in the way I breathed. I rubbed my eyes, trying to summon a ghost of regret, but there was only clarity. My marriage had not been a union. It had been a long-term hostile takeover. My phone buzzed on the marble nightstand. A text from Brittany. I did not flinch. I just picked it up and read the words with the cold eye of a forensic accountant. I hope you enjoyed your night in whatever flea-ridden motel you found, Jacob. But let us get down to business. The conservatorship papers Trevor drafted are now active. Either you transfer the funds from your personal account by noon, or I will petition the court for an involuntary psychiatric evaluation. I hear the state psychiatric wards are quite crowded these days. Choose wisely. I sat on the edge of the king-size bed, the silk sheets a stark contrast to the grease-stained overalls I had worn for decades. I did not feel fear. I felt the trap of normalized cruelty. To Brittany, this message was not an act of evil. It was a standard business negotiation. Over 3 decades, she had successfully normalized the idea that I was not a person, but a piece of industrial infrastructure designed to facilitate her lifestyle. When the machine stops producing, you either fix it or scrap it. She had drifted into a psychological state where empathy was an inefficient use of resources. I was an underperforming asset, and she was simply initiating the liquidation process. I did not answer. I did not send a single word. Instead, I called the number Mr. Chen had provided at the bank. 2 hours later, I was sitting in the law offices of Whitman, Chen and Associates. This was my new tool and die shop, but instead of metal, we were going to shape the law. Patricia Whitman, a woman with eyes as sharp as a diamond-tipped drill, introduced me to Linda Harrison, a private investigator Michael had trusted. Linda did not offer a handshake. She offered a thick leather file. "Mr. Morrison," she said, her voice clinical and lethal, "your wife did not just decide to trade you in for a younger model. She and your sister, Sydney, have been hunting for your father's wealth for over 10 years. The name hit me like a physical blow. Sydney, my own blood. The sister who had hugged me at Michael's funeral, whispering that we only had each other now. They have been coordinating," Linda continued, sliding a series of bank inquiries and emails across the mahogany table. They contacted 3 different international brokerages. They hired a genealogy researcher to find Michael's hidden properties. They knew the money existed, Jacob. They just could not find the key. Brittany did not stay with you for love. She stayed because she was waiting for a payday that Michael refused to give her while he was alive. They spent a decade digging, but Michael was a ghost in the system, Linda added. He funneled the assets through a blind trust in South Dakota, managed by a shell corporation that had no paper trail linking back to his social security number. To the world, he was just a retired machinist on a pension. To the bank, he was an anonymous titan of industry that they were legally bound to protect. I leaned back, looking at the city below. My compassion had been a luxury. They had overdrafted for nearly 3 decades. Now, the bank was closed, and I was calling in the debt. I sat in the mahogany-panelled conference room, watching Patricia Whitman's pen dance across a stack of legal documents, with the precision of a surgeon. The air in the office was thick, with the scent of high-grade paper and silent power. For 28 years, I had navigated the world of heavy machinery and industrial tolerances, where 1,000th of an inch determines success or failure. Now I was learning that the law had its own tolerances, and Brittany was about to find out. She was vibrating far outside the safety zone. "Jacob," Patricia said, her voice a calm, low hum that signalled an impending storm. "Your father did not just invest in tech stocks, he diversified. Michael operated through a shell corporation called Grease and Gear Holdings. It is a portfolio that includes commercial real estate across the Midwest. And we just found a very poetic coincidence." She slid a digital tablet toward me. "The high-rise on Market Street, the one housing Trevor's law firm, is owned entirely by your father's estate. You are now his landlord." I looked at the building's registry, and for the first time in weeks, a cold, dry smile touched my face. Trevor had spent the last month treating my home like his personal trophy, lounging in the living room I had paid for, while he drafted papers to strip me of my sanity. He thought he was the architect of my destruction. He did not realise he was currently working inside a structure Michael had built to protect me. "What are our options?" I asked. "The lease agreement for his firm has a very specific morality and professional conduct clause," James Chen added, leaning forward. "Based on the documented evidence of legal fraud and conspiracy, we filed an emergency injunction to suspend his access to the building for a forensic audit," Patricia explained. "This isn't a standard eviction that takes months. This is a security lockdown for a breach of the building's insurance and ethics policy. His keycards will be deactivated by dawn, and he'll be restricted from the premises indefinitely." I nodded. "Do it. I want the locks changed before the market opens tomorrow. If he wants his files, he can talk to my security team on the sidewalk." But we were not done with the audit. Brittany had mentioned $165,000 for her jewellery line, a business that did not exist, except as a sinkhole for my former earnings. Patricia revealed that Brittany had been funding her lifestyle through high-interest credit lines hidden under the very house she had tricked me into signing over. Using my father's liquid capital, I did not just pay her debts, I bought them. By 3 p.m, I was the sole owner of $165,000 of Brittany's personal liability. I was not just her husband anymore, I was her primary creditor. In the eyes of the bank, she was not a golden child or a socialite. She was a high-risk debtor with a 0% chance of recovery. Every swipe of her card, every luxury appointment she had scheduled was now a transaction she owed to me. This was not revenge. Revenge is emotional and messy. This was accounting. I was simply balancing the ledger of a 28-year marriage where the overhead had become unsustainable. As I walked out of the office, the street, Louis sunset, was a deep, bruised purple. Inside Trevor's office, the lights were likely still on, the lovers still believing they were the ones in control. They were not shocked by what they had done to me. They were just waiting for me to keep playing along. They had no idea I had already closed the account. The storage unit was located in a corner of the city, where the neon lights of downtown faded into the grey reality of industrial warehouses. Unit number 47 was climate-controlled, smelling of machine oil and the sterile scent of archival paper. This was Michael's true office, the place where the machinist had become the architect of my survival. Linda Harrison and Patricia Whitman stood behind me as I turned the key. Inside, the walls were lined with filing cabinets, each one labelled with the precision of a master tool and die maker. But it was the desk in the centre that held the weight of the room. On it sat a single, heavy, leather-bound journal and a series of small, sealed glass vials. I opened the journal. Michael's handwriting was steady, even as the dates approached his final weeks, 15 years ago. He had not died of a heart that simply gave out. He had died of a heart that was forced to stop. My father had been an old mechanic, and he knew how to spot bad oil before it seized an engine. He had realised that his morning tea tasted like copper, and his vision was blurring in a way that did not match his medical charts. He did not call the police then. He knew that if he had them arrested while I was still under Brittany's influence, she would have played the victim, and I would have spent my life defending her. He chose to become a ghost, to save my life. He had meticulously saved hair and nail samples, sealing them in those vials with timestamps. These vials weren't just hidden in a box. They were duplicates of a set Michael had deposited with a neutral legal escrow service years ago. He had included a notarized affidavit, ensuring that the chain of custody was bulletproof for the police. He knew that for his silent testimony to hold up in a first-degree murder trial, the evidence had to be beyond legal reproach. He knew that one day science would catch up to their greed. "The toxicology report came back an hour ago," Patricia said, her voice echoing in the small space. "The samples contain lethal, accumulating levels of digitalis." It is a heart medication that is impossible to detect in a standard autopsy if administered correctly over time. She handed me a file. We tracked the prescription. It was not Michael's. It was Sydney's. Sydney, my sister. The nurse who had sat at my father's bedside, holding his hand while she slowly drained the life from him. She had used her professional access to provide the weapon, and Brittany had been the one to pull the trigger. This was not just family drama anymore. The sisterly bond and the marriage contract were officially null and void. They were no longer my relatives. They were the lead defendants in a first-degree murder investigation. I've already presented your father's samples and the notarized affidavit to the district attorney's office, Patricia continued. Based on the clear evidence of foul play, they are fast-tracking a warrant for a forensic exhumation. Combined with the recordings and the samples your father left, we have them trapped. There is no redemption arc here, Jacob. There is only a cell. I looked at the vials. Michael had sacrificed his final months to ensure I would one day have the evidence to be truly free. He had played a long game that cost him his life, but he had won. I felt a surge of cold, clinical satisfaction. My sister and my wife had treated my father like an obstacle to a payday. They had undervalued his life, just as they had undervalued mine. But they had forgotten one fundamental rule of mechanics. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. The mediocre husband they had discarded now held the keys to their permanent incarceration. I closed the journal and walked out. The audit was over. The trial was beginning. I invited her to the diner on 5th Street, the exact same booth where we had shared our first meal 29 years ago. Back then, I was a 27-year-old machinist, full of hope, and she was the woman I thought I would spend forever protecting. Now, the sticky vinyl and the smell of burnt coffee felt like the only honest things left between us. Brittany arrived 15 minutes late, but she did not have her usual air of practiced elegance. Her hair was unwashed, her eyes were bloodshot, and she was clutching her designer purse, like a life raft in a storm. She slid into the booth and did not even look at the menu. "Jacob, thank God," she whispered, her voice cracking for the first time in 3 decades. "Everything is falling apart. Trevor's firm was evicted this morning, and the bank froze my accounts. I have been trying to reach Jackson, but he is gone. I need $50,000, Jacob, just to clear the immediate debt. You are the only person who can stop this." I did not answer right away. I watched a bead of sweat roll down her forehead, ruining the heavy foundation she had used to hide her panic. I reached into my pocket, but I did not pull out a checkbook. I pulled out my phone and slid it across the table. "Look at the screen, Brittany," I said. My voice was as cold and steady as a steel plate. She looked down, and I watched her pupils dilate as she saw the certified digital statement on the screen detailing the private wealth trust balance. $24,935,786. "Where? How did you get this?" she stammered, her hands beginning to shake. "You have had this the whole time?" "I have had it for 3 weeks, I replied. "It was Michael's legacy. The money you spent 10 years trying to steal, while you called me mediocre." I swiped the screen to the next file. It was a video from the security feed at Trevor's high-rise. It showed Trevor standing on the sidewalk in a rumpled suit, surrounded by cardboard boxes, looking exactly as pathetic as I had on my own curb 3 weeks ago. Brittany let out a small, strangled sound, but I was not finished. I swiped one last time. The screen displayed the forensic report from Michael's storage unit, the digitalis concentrations, the pharmacy records in Sydney's name, and the draft for the first-degree murder warrant. The colour drained from her face until she looked like a corpse. She tried to stand, but her legs would not hold her. "Jacob, please. We were a family." "No," I corrected her, leaning forward until I could smell the scent of her fear. "We were a transaction. I was the silent investor, and you were the parasite. You killed the only man who truly cared about my future, because you were too impatient to wait for a payday you did not earn. I took my phone back and stood up, looking down at the woman I had loved for half my life. I was never mediocrity, Brittany, I said. I was your only protection. Now you have nothing. I walked out of the diner without looking back, leaving her alone in the booth where we had started, with a lifetime of consequences finally catching up to her. The legal system moved with the same surgical precision I had employed. Sydney was sentenced to life in a maximum security facility without the possibility of parole for the calculated first-degree murder of our father. Brittany, stripped of the mansion and the designer lifestyle she had committed murder to obtain, disappeared into the fringes of society. Last I heard, she was living in a cramped trailer park in Florida, surviving on the very mediocrity she once mocked me for. I used a significant portion of the inheritance to establish a scholarship fund for aspiring machinists, ensuring that my father's true passion for creating and building would be a legacy that outlived us all. I am sitting now on the old wooden bench my father built with his own hands, watching the sunrise paint the Street Louis skyline in shades of gold. I've come to realize that real wealth was never found in a bank balance of nearly $25 million. Brittany and Sydney lived under the illusion that power was something you could steal from a wallet. They never understood that when the wallet is empty, you are left only with who you are. Their power was a facade. But my father's strength was in his character. If you find yourself in a similar situation, remember that your worth is not a transaction others get to negotiate. Real justice is not just about the downfall of those who hurt you. It is about the quiet act of removing parasites from your life so you can finally grow. I have learned that forgiveness is not always for the other person. Sometimes it is the only way to set yourself free. I chose to be a sower of good because building something beautiful is the only way to truly honor the past. The best revenge is not destruction. It is becoming the person they said you could never be and moving forward with a peaceful heart. If you believe that the truth always finds its way to the light, share this story. Do not forget to like and subscribe for more tales of justice.